But today, we go back. Someone look at Romans 15:13. We have to land this series we've been in called Over God or Under God, or Under God or Over God, depending on which way you want to look at it. Well, we've been kind of dealing with the big, huge topic of where we are in our journey and what that looks like and where we are as our culture. And we've been making the analogies where we've been looking at some things that history teaches us and some things that we need to remember as we kind of think back over history. And along the way, trying to make sure that we don't make the same mistakes again. So someone read Romans 15:13 for us, if you wouldn't mind.
Now may the God of hope fill you with all joy and peace as you believe, so that you may overflow with hope by the power of the Holy Spirit.
The way we diagrammed it explains it. God gives us hope. That hope fills us with joy and peace, overflows out of us into the culture. In essence, that's what the verse is talking about. And for us, that really becomes the backdrop of how we're supposed to navigate the world that we live in. That's the culture we live in. We've added to that for this particular series the passage out of 2 Timothy chapter 2, where Paul is writing to Timothy and basically explain to Timothy that there are some things that he has to be ready to do. There are seasons of life where you have to be willing to do these things to be successful. And so he uses the description of a soldier, an athlete, and a farmer. I said the mistake that we make very often as we read that passage is we just figure out who we are. We read the passage, oh, I'm the farmer, I'm the athlete, I'm the soldier. That's not what Paul's saying. Paul was letting Timothy know that the things that these three illustrations do, you have to do at different seasons. So sometimes you're going to be a farmer, sometimes you're going to be a soldier, sometimes you're going to be an athlete. And those characteristics are all things that are going to be necessary. Those are roles you're going to have to step up and fill if you're going to get this being who you're supposed to be and shaping the culture and leading in tough times well. Okay? And then so we've gone back then and we've looked at what we call level lines. We've been looking at these now for 2 months. Answering the question, are we under God or over God? In other words, for a culture, what are we doing and how does that look? And we've gone back and we used Nazi Germany as illustration. Not that America is like Nazi Germany, but we made the analogy that in Nazi Germany, they didn't become Nazi Germany overnight. Some things in the culture were taking place, events, a flow to culture that set the tone for Hitler to rise to power. And so that we've been using that then as a historical backdrop for our discussion over the past few weeks. And so this is the level line. When God is separated from government, judgment follows. And so we asked the question, are we above that? Are we below that? What are we doing? Where's that? Are we staying above and rising above that? Are we keeping God in the public square, or is he not? And if not, then that sets the tone for something to go horribly wrong. It's always the economy. We looked at the fact that Hitler rose to power because he was able to make and invigorate the German economy when they were in economic crisis. We went as far as giving you some of those quotes that basically Churchill's quote was terrifying. Had Hitler stopped when the economy got good, he would have gone down as one of the great leaders of all time. What he did instead was became a tyrant. He became a dictator. But Hitler knew, and it was very much on purpose. He was there and he was trying to reinvigorate the economy. That which is legal might also be evil. So in other words, just because it's legal doesn't mean it's right. We talked about that, and we talked about the laws that were making in Nazi Germany, and we then, of course, made some parallels as to what are we doing here in our nation right now, making sure that we're not falling into the trap of doing things just because you can, because maybe you ought not to be. And then propaganda can change a nation. We talked about that a little bit. We talked about that a lot, actually. Hitler was very good at propaganda. He wrote the book on it, and others have borrowed the book and continue to borrow it to this day and use it. We've talked about that. Hitler's big approach was, and he stuck with this, he said, you tell a lie, but not a little lie, you tell a big lie. You tell a lie so big that people will say, this is unbelievable, but they'll eventually believe it. I mean, so he was a master at that. He used propaganda to rise to power. He used propaganda to ultimately kill 11 million people. That's the power of propaganda. Propaganda is not true, by the way. Propaganda can be anything, but publicity, hopefully, is true. Propaganda is not. And propaganda can be anything that you want to communicate something that you're trying to get across. And the reality is there may be nothing behind it, but if you do the propaganda right, people will buy it. It's called hype. We live in a world of hype. And then last week we were talking about this. Parents, not the state, are responsible for the training of a child. And that's where we were 2 weeks ago, I'm sorry. That's what we were kind of in the middle of 2 weeks ago before we kind of blew out, okay? And so that, if you look at that, that puts us at 5, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There are 2 more we're going to add to the mix, but they're short, which is really good. But questions about that before we jump into new stuff? Comments about that?
Jeff, you were saying whether we are under God or over God, and I was just reading something in the paper that I realized that people are moved so far from God, it's just unbelievable. And they were talking about astrology, and people, that they wouldn't have their car fixed unless the planets were aligned. They wouldn't take a vacation unless the planets were Mercury was in this, and thinking they wouldn't move an inch unless they consulted their astrological guide and guides from whoever they looked to. I said, this guy is in tough shape. I mean, people don't want to listen to the God of the Bible, but they want to look at the stars. That God actually created the stars.
Yeah.
But I said, I was reading it, I said, this is weird. And they, like I said,
That's an understatement.
Like I said first, I mean, they have moved, so far from the Creator God. It's just unreal.
Yeah. No, it's always good advice. Look to the Creator of the stars instead of the stars for your guidance, right? Yeah. I mean, it's always healthy. Yep. Any other questions about that before we roll? That makes sense to you, right? I mean, they're.
That bottom one, I wasn't here last week. That parents, what's the summary?
Not the state.
What's the summary on that?
We were talking about, and we'll kind of wrap that up here in a couple of minutes. We're going to jump back in there. But Hitler, in Nazi Germany, Hitler believed and basically said that the children were property of the state. The state was responsible for raising the children because the parents were going to die. And if he could take the youth of a culture and develop them and teach them and through the educational system shape them, then that was what Germany was supposed to do. So the kids belonged to Germany, not their parents, because Germany knew what was best. Now, and of course, when this came out, I think we ended last time, at least from the email I got. It said it had just came out that we were dealing with the Don't Say Gay law that had was hitting the news cycle pretty heavy. We made some statements there, but I think I wrapped it up. I think this was kind of where we were concluding last week. I said the thing is though, if you end up with anyone out there that's pressing or against that bill, the fair question is, why do you want responsibility for teaching my kids about sex? You tell me why. And then there's a question for the Walt Disney Company, by the way. Mm-hmm. Why do you want to take the responsibility for grooming my child with gender and sexuality issues? Why is that your job? Why do you want that job so badly? And when you get, and that's the answer you have to call out. Because ultimately, that's the battleground, that's the application for that idea today, right? Because I think I made a statement. This is, as someone pointed out to me, that may have made it a little bit harder than I needed to, so I'll make it again just as hard. If you do that to my child, you're a predator. End of the story. You're a sexual predator. You have that conversation with my kid, you have become a predator. It's the end of the game. And there's now a battle line that's drawn. Because see, God gives me my children to raise with the responsibility to raise them. They're my responsibility, and I'm accountable to God for that. We've heard this phrase, it's a popular phrase, it takes a village to raise a child. Well, you know what? If you live in a stupid village, you don't want those people raising your child. If you're the village idiot, you don't want the village idiot talking to your child, right? And if you have a village full of idiots, you don't want them helping your child. It doesn't take a village to raise a child. It takes a community of people, and I've chosen to put my child in a godly community of people. I trust you with my child. I make that choice. I make that choice based on relationship. I make that choice on commonality. We're building a bond in Christ. And so, yes, I want your help. You do help raise my child in the community, in the context of community. But the community in a biblical sense, not in this Marxist, utopian, it takes a village. Villages are full of dumb people.
Some are missing the idiot.
Yeah, and so, if you want to fight to have the responsibility to have sexuality taught and gender identification taught for a pre-K through a third grader, you are a predator. That's the end of the story. And there's got to be a reason you want to teach that. So let's get down to the agenda of why, and that's the question you got to ask: why? Why?
I think there's a why that goes back 50 years, because 50 years ago, families look different than they do now.
Mm-hmm.
And we've gone through the transition now, whether you're inside or outside the church, more than 50% of the people are divorced, rematched families, whatever, not passing any judgment, but that's the cards that are out there now. And so family has changed. The culture has then redefined the family. It redefined gender. We didn't get the bat crap crazy with the turn of one page. This has been going on for 50 years. The same thing with the church. When you first got into ministry, the first thing that they did was they hired a youth guy. They had a preacher, they might have had a worship guy, then they hired a youth guy, then they would build a youth building or something out back, and you had this big movement of, if we build it for the kids, the parents will come like that. And the church has gone all the way through that, and they haven't really, it's kind of an unguided mess that got us here. It's not something that happened overnight. Mm-hmm. And I look at that, and what I came up with was, purely Occam's razor. Because of a vacuum is why we have that. That's over broad brush, but personally, when they put in the sex ed stuff in Seminole County when they first did it, it was a big hoopla. I don't know if you remember it, but there was a big deal about it. Lori and I went to go look at the curriculum. You had to sign in. Now, we had people in churches talking, we had pastors talking, we had all kinds of people talking. Do you remember how many people had signed in to review it?
We were it.
Yeah.
We were
Sure.
it.
Sure.
To sign in and review the curriculum, and you had all that going on. And that's why I said, it's not that we were great parents or anything, obviously, but it was dumb. I remember asking her, are these the people that came in tonight to look at it? And she said, no. And I said, wait a minute. This has been in the newspaper. Somebody has written articles about this, and they haven't reviewed this firsthand. They said, we know. We asked people to come. We advertised it. They didn't come. So it's, there's been this vacuum that the church has kind of owned some of it. And when we pulled a lot of the Christian kids out of public schools and put them in Christian schools, and we went through that whole generation. I'm not knocking anybody. That's your choice, and I support whatever God tells you to do. But when we do that, it took a lot of steps to get into that hole. And I think it's going to take a lot of steps to get out.
It'll take a lot to get out of the hole. And the other thing is, too, and while that was going on, okay, there's another track that you've got to recognize is going on as well. And this is the track where the driving forces, and I said the driving forces behind this idea of if you can change a generation, if you can get the kids in good shape. You know how a lot of these school boards end up making some of these rules and decisions that started rippling through. Is, you know, they had school board meetings, and the same thing would happen. No one would show up to school board meeting.
Nobody shows up.
No one would show up. And they'd be agenda items, but no one would be there. There's no participation. There's no input. There's no parents asking the questions. And so anything went through. I am convinced, I really do believe with all my heart, perhaps, I believe with all my heart, perhaps, I believe with all my heart that for many Christians, one of the greatest things they could do if they want to be involved politically is get elected to their school boards. I think in some ways that's the firing line, the front line. Now the ripple effect, I'll come back there. Is, you know, you read this week. I mean, I don't know if you read the news, heard the news this week, but you know, in Florida we have kicked out 50% of our math books. Well, that's great. Okay, good. But here's the thing that hasn't happened yet, and it needs to happen, by the way. Because, I mean, I want to call balls and strikes, right? I want to make sure that we get the ball over the plate, and if it's fair, great. If it's foul, I want to call it. Well, I like the fact that we're going to look at our curriculums now and make sure that there's no CRT and stuff like that in it. But we do have to give an account for what we didn't like about the book and didn't let it in. We do have to verbalize that. And see, right now the state hasn't done that. So as big as a fan I am of DeSantis making that rule, and I will back him on that rule. I will cheer for him. I think it's a great rule. Okay, so we kicked out 50%. Why? Because you can't just say, well, it didn't hit the standard. Okay, what's the standard? Tell me what was in the math book that was offensive. Because if you're going to be the firewall, but give an account for what you're doing. Because transparency says, honesty says, truth says that if there is a reason and the reason is valid, you must give that reason. You owe it to the people that you're working for to give them that reason. And if the state doesn't ante up and do that, then that's just as bad as what they were trying to prevent. And they haven't done it yet. Now, will they? I have hope that they will. I know it's only been a week. But it made national news that they banned books, and no one's answered the question, why'd they ban the books? If they don't make the cut, then they don't make the cut. Why? What's wrong with them? You know, and of course, if someone's going to say, and the assumption is, it's a word problem. It's going to be word problems. I assume that it's going to be word problems. I never understood word problems anyway. So you could have tried to change my orientation in a word problem, and I wouldn't have got it. I was never in danger of doing that. But by the same token, others still would be. And so I appreciate that. Not being mathematically inclined, I never could figure out what 2 + 2 equals. So, you know, that's a whole different story. But we do have to give an account for it because that's the right way to do it. No, Matt, you had your hand up. I just rolled all over there.
I was just, you had mentioned the school board. Well, ironically, I found out this week from a church member that there's a school board in Central Florida that has a gay, like, well, don't say gay, right? A homosexual
Well, hey, it is
nucleus that is growing, and they're working their way up the ladder. They've gotten into the school board now. There's a few teachers here and there, and now here we have principals. And so now you've got all the bases covered of that nucleus to push the propaganda, to push the, you know, whatever. Like you said, they're the ones controlling the content. They're the ones wanting to shape with their content.
Yeah.
And if that's who the leaders are, what do you think the content's going to be?
Sure. I mean, and so I mean, you know, as a follower, I mean, you know, these are things we have to care about. This is where you stand on the front line of making change, and so it's important. And how you do it matters, right? Which is why you come back to what I said about, you know, okay, so if we're going to ban a math book, great. We need to be able to give an account for why this book didn't make the cut. That's reasonable. That's rational. And if it didn't make the cut, then there's got to be a reason for it. So why? Because if you got to keep the reason a secret, then maybe the book should have made the cut.
There's actually I read an article about a school board down in West South, and they tried to set up, sorry, west.
Southwest? Okay, God, I was really confused. I was trying to get there. I couldn't get there from here,
They
yeah.
tried to get a committee together, and they tried to pack it with certain ideology people that had certain ideologies, and then they somehow, people found out about it or something. Anyway, they made them start over on the grounds of a Sunshine Act, and what it is basically in Florida, they have to be transparent and they have to allow people to come to the meetings. They have to take minutes and all that, which these people were not doing. They were trying to ram through certain things.
Yeah.
And so I don't know if that's gonna take precedent in what you're talking about.
Well, Florida does have Sunshine State laws. I mean, and there's I know Tommy and I have been through the ringer with those. I mean, you have to go through the training, the certification for it. You've got to sit down. You've got to go through the lawyer's presentation on what's right and what's not right. There's rules and regulations, and yeah, it's got to be. There are certain conversations you can't have outside of an open public forum or a board setting. I mean, and now, are they doing that? No. Should they be doing it? Well, they said they would, and does it matter? Well, it matters in situations like this. I mean, yeah, so so that being said, then in the state of Florida, there are mechanisms in place that if they would work and if people would adhere to them,
Challenge that.
yeah, I mean, but the system is in place to do it well. Okay, I mean, which is great for us. I don't know if it's that way. I don't know how it works other places, but I mean, yeah, the system's there. Now, nothing can screw up a system more than people. People mess it up every time. This committee work then, so it gets wonky. Let me give you a list of things that our kids. And again, this is really a random list that was put out by obviously a pro-Christian group that's basically a sampling of some things that have been taught in some school systems in the U.S. Some schools are using textbooks that obviously are minimizing the influence of Christianity and maximizing Islamic influences, which may surprise or not surprise you, I don't know. Some college administrators or professors have put the kibosh on pro-American speeches on campus after the 9/11 attacks of 2001 because America was the aggressor. And using that ideology, the American flag is also not allowed because it is divisive and not to be honored. A California teacher was forbidden and fired for showing his students the Declaration of Independence last year because it refers to God. According to one California judge, the Constitution itself was deemed unconstitutional. How can that be? So that case is still kind of moving through the court. And so, I mean, you get to a point where you have to understand, and it was a very good point, as John made it earlier, the culture has changed. And so, the school system that I grew up in doesn't exist anymore. The school system that you grew up in doesn't exist anymore. The culture has changed. But as the culture has changed, the message of Christ has not, and the influence that we're supposed to have has not. And we just have to make sure that we are good and informed and good handlers of the truth. And I think that that's where the church lost ground. I just don't think we've done a good job with the truth. We just figured that somebody's sitting at the helm, somebody's watching this thing, and they really do care. Well, they care, but what do they care about? And that's always the question. And it's terrifying to think that there might be another agenda out there, but there is. Someone wanted to take me to task for the statement that I made publicly that there is a battle going on for the souls of our children and our grandchildren. So take me to task on that if you want. I stand by that statement. we live in a world where the battle that's taking place is for the soul of our kids. You're here on Wednesday night. I'm not worried about you. I love you, but I'm not really worried about you. You wouldn't be here on Wednesday night if you didn't care. Maybe. We'll see. But the battle lines. I mean, your kids and your grandkids are going to step into that every day. And so for us, helping them, making sure that we can understand and handle the truth, and helping them understand and handle the truth, that's essential. And that's something that it doesn't matter what school environment you're going to be in, a public school environment, a private school environment, charter school environment, Christian school environment, homeschool environment. It doesn't matter where you are. You have responsibility there, and your kids have to be able to learn the truth. I mean, what is? Oh gosh, give me the year. Oh man, I'm just Easter brained or COVID brained.
No, Easter brain, okay.
What? It's not the 1776 project or report. It's
1619, yeah.
There you go. Yes, that's the number I'm looking for. I mean, amazing that you realize that revised history book won a Pulitzer Prize, right? And it won a Pulitzer Prize for being one of the most outstanding historical books of the year, written and supported and underwritten by New York Times, which is called the paper of record. By the way, last year they won 3 Pulitzer Prizes for reporting on stories that have now proven a year later to be lies. But they haven't given the prizes back. But they are the authority behind this little history revision project that went on. And the fact checkers that they hired said, your facts are wrong. So you know what they did? They fired the fact checkers. Because the fact checkers said, you can't say this. You've made a jump you can't make. This isn't history now. This is opinion, and it's not good opinion. Well, let's just find fact checkers that will agree with us. And so the end result is that this is now a thing that is filtering through, and it has made the author a rock star. But it's a work of fiction. Yet it's being said to be historical fact. Number 1 on the New York Times bestseller list. That's the world we live in. That's the culture we live in.
Yeah, there's another book that, I don't know, predicts all this stuff that's going to happen.
Look at that.
Might have heard about it in the Bible.
Really? Yeah. So with our balance, and of course that's where our truth comes from, right? I mean, so we're navigating a world that doesn't value truth. So you can trust the fact that in the environments that you put your children or grandchildren in, truth, there's got to be a filter somewhere. Where's that filter come from? I believe that we're supposed to do that as parents and grandparents and as this community of faith. I don't believe it's necessarily the job of the school. I want the school to get it right, but I don't necessarily trust the school to get it right, and I want to have a say in that.
You're talking about culture and how we need to raise our kids. Part of the challenge, we're grandparents, and we've worked real hard on our own kids, but now we've got our grandkids who, in some cases, are not in the same culture that we're in because of divorce, because of this, because of that. And there's a challenge of trying to reach those kids because now they're in 2 different environments. And for us, that's a challenge.
Sure it is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is.
It is. I mean, there is. Every Christian family I know has their own unique set of challenges. And the cultural shift is what it was now. I mean, it's shifted. So it doesn't necessarily shift back. That's just the playing field that we have to learn to deal with. Which means that one of the things that we have to come to grips with that nobody likes is that you have to learn a new skill set to navigate the culture. And that's our problem, right? We don't want anything new. We want how we always have done it to be the way we've always done it. That's church's problem. That's that's anybody's problem, right? I mean, this is the way we always did it. This is what I like. This is what I know. This is what we're going to do. Well, it doesn't work in any area of life. And it doesn't work in family, and it doesn't work in culture. We adapt in some ways. I mean, most of you in this room, I bet you have a cell phone. I bet you have apps on that cell phone. Now, some of you might still have a flip phone. Anybody have a flip phone? Yeah, wouldn't it be nice? I'd like if I didn't have a phone. But we figured that out. We figured out what to do with that. We get incredibly frustrated. How many times do you get upset because I can't get an internet connection? Or what's the internet password? You're offended if someone's got a security blocking your ability to get on the internet and they won't give you the password. We get upset about that. Because, we've made that, we are connected now. We've got to be able to be connected. We've got to be able to have that kind of connection. Well, see, so we've learned to adapt. We're adaptable. We can do that. We just have to learn how to do culture, and we have to learn to do it better. Okay? Which brings me to my next level line, by the way. Ordinary heroes can make a difference. See, we live in a day and age where we're wanting somebody to rescue us, but at the end of the day, we are the front line. I mean, that's the beauty of Easter, isn't it? Jesus' ragtag bunch of misfits ended up changing the world. Again, we've mentioned it so many times before, but if you watch The Chosen, to me, the most amazing thing about The Chosen is what a great job they have done in trying to capture and portray the disciples in a way that you're just not normally get to see them. Because you don't think about the disciples not getting along. You don't think about the disciples, disagreeing. You don't think about the disciples trying to figure out, well, what is he doing now, and why is he doing it this way, and how they have to work that out and make that happen. Because they're a bunch of ordinary people that Jesus took, and he took each one in their uniqueness, and he shaped them, and he used them to make change in the world. And he does the same thing to us. Ordinary heroes are the world changers. We want people to step up and do something bold. We want people to step up and do something great, and we want to say, that's who I want to follow. Well, that's part of what happens, right? I mean, culturally, if you think that the fix is coming with the next candidate or the next government change, you're wrong. Change comes when people like you and me decide that we're going to change that way things are going to be. And it's really easy to get frustrated and say, well, I just can't do it. I just can't make a difference. Well, yeah, you can. Yeah, you can. Because ordinary people are the ones that make change. Think about it. Most of your lives are touched, not by some superstar somewhere. You haven't met that many superstars over the course of your lifetime. But how's your life been shaped? Do people who pour their life into you every day, teachers in schools, godly teachers, people that took the time to pour into you. It could be coaches. It could be some kind of an instructor. It could be a coworker. It can be a boss. It can be a mentor. But I mean, those are the people that have changed your life. Those are ordinary folks. They don't usually get the headlines, but they're very real people that took the time to care, and they changed you. And as a result, because they've changed you, then that influence that they've had on you has now rippled through somebody else. And so we're called to be salt and light in a world that desperately needs that light. But it's people like us that make it. Ordinary people can make and do make a huge difference. And so you got to ask yourself, are we living in an era where we believe as ordinary people, and are we looking for ordinary people to be the people of change, or are we looking for someone else? See, because one of the things that happens a lot of times is we want to blame. If you're a Republican, you hate what the Democrats are doing right now. And every woe in the world is the Democrats' fault. So, inevitably, you blame and you pick the Democratic choice, probably the president. But at the end of the day, you like somebody else, it's not going to get any better. Not unless you take the time to elect the right person. Remember what we said way back when we were doing the series on is Jesus a Republican, Democrat, or Independent? And I said to you when it comes time to vote that your vote is not a Valentine. Your vote is not a Valentine. It's not a love letter for a candidate. I've never loved a candidate that I voted for, ever. In the history of my life, I can never remember loving a candidate that I voted for. I don't love them. Don't love any of them. But yet, we think that that's what it's supposed to. I just love this person. Or if we don't like anybody on the list, we just go, I don't like anybody, so I'm just not going to vote. It's not a love letter. It's a chess move. Every time I've cast a vote in my life, it is a move of playing chess for the kind of world that I want to live in, that I want to raise my kids in, or want to raise my grandkids in. Every time I cast my vote, I am making a chess move on a chessboard. But I'm not sending a Valentine to anybody. So I'm going to take my responsibility seriously, and I'm going to be an ordinary person that's going to make a difference, because ordinary heroes do make a difference. They always do. And so we have to be willing to ask the questions and have the conversations that we don't want to have. I talked last week with a teacher who, I'll say this right, who might watch this. In our conversation, because of something they said to my child, I had to have a conversation. I didn't know what you believe. About what, Mr. Dixon? About God? I want to know what you believe about God. Because now you've said something to my child, that matters to me. I also have some very strong beliefs about God. We need to have a conversation, and we're going to have it. I don't want to have that conversation with you. It's private. I said, cease being private the minute you said something to my child. We're not private anymore. How hard do you want to push this? Now, I got news for you. As a parent, they're going to give me the answer I want, and they did. And we're all right. But for a minute, I wasn't so sure about where we were going to land. But here's what you have to understand. I didn't care where we were going to land. Because in that moment, the conversation we were having was about right or wrong and about my responsibility as a parent to raise my child. Caring about what's going to happen next is not the issue. The issue is truth, and the issue is what are you going to do with truth. Now, they're not easy, by the way. Sometimes they're really uncomfortable. But you have to decide, is the end game, and I don't mean game loosely, is it worth it? And it is. It is. It's huge. And we, as followers, are living in a generation where I am convinced we are part of the battleground. You say, well, I don't like that. Well, okay, I don't either. I mean, not to be offensive, but if you don't like it, go listen to Joel Osteen. He'll tell you, this is my Bible. And then probably 50% of what he's going to say is wrong. But if that's what you like, let's roll with it. Because I didn't know you were a Joel Osteen fan. But for us, as followers, we have to recognize that while we might be unsung heroes, God sings over us. And so the last thing I want to give you before we walk out the door is simply this. This is the last one. I'm cramming it in. You can tell. I'm flipping all the pages. Here we go. You have to exalt the cross in the gathering darkness. In other words, and so this is the level line. Are we exalting the cross in the gathering darkness? Because again, good news, bad news. These three words were uttered in July 23rd, 1933. Confess, confess, confess. Dietrich Bonhoeffer was addressing a German audience on the radio, and he was calling them and having that conversation on the radio as Hitler was being installed as chancellor over Germany. And he was calling the church to confess and to repent over the fact that they had put their hope in a man as opposed to God. By the way, Hitler had Bonhoeffer's speech turned off before he completed it. People never heard the end of that speech. It was shut down, censored, canceled, if you will. And what we have to understand is that in church world, and John kind of didn't say this, but he did a few minutes ago. See, in church world, we have forgotten what our message is sometimes. I mean, we try to keep it simple here. You're going to touch and change the world with love of Christ. We're going to love Jesus. We're going to love other people. And we're going to share that love of Christ. Well, where does that love come from? It comes from a resurrected Savior. We just celebrated that. The cross is the center of it. It's not about being woke. It's not about being politically correct. It's not about being LGBTQ, LMOP sensitive. It's not about being, Disney plus or minus. It's not about being any of those things. What it is about being willing to step into a world that needs to know Jesus and just say, okay, this is what it looks like. This is who he is. And this is what it means. We have to make sure that the message stays on track, and we have to make sure that we deliver that message in a way that is going to be clear and powerful. Think about the power of the early church, right? I mean, they had nothing going for them. They had no positions of power. They had no authority. The Roman government was always trying to kill them. The religious leaders of the day, the established religion of the day, was trying to kill them. And yet they were able to change and turn the world, as Acts 17 says, turn the world upside down. Why did they do that? How could they do that? Well, they did that simply because they knew very clearly what the message was. They talked about grace, and they talked about forgiveness, and they talked about repentance, and they talked about obedience. And they called sin, sin. And they didn't worry about being canceled. They worried about sharing truth. Jesus made the statement, we've talked about it before, that the truth will set you free. And if you forget the truth, you will live in bondage. I mean, the lines are that clear and that complicated. And so we got to be done. No, you got to get your kids. Let's pray. Jesus, we thank you that you give us a chance to decide whether or not we're going to live our lives under your authority or whether we're going to choose for ourselves to be over your authority. And that's a choice we make. And so, God, for each level line that we've looked at, I pray that we would just be very sensitive to the world around us, the culture that we live in. These days are tough. They're not easy. And yet, by the same token, they are the most exciting days to be able to do this thing called ministry. And so, God, help us to be that group of people that would be a voice of change and reason and truth in a world of just upside down insanity. And help us along the way to be willing to be honest with ourselves about where we are in our journey of faith so that we might grow and be who you've created us to be. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.